Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the enemy approach on the main screen. His forearms moved across different control panels as his large, blue-skinned form towered over the smaller crew members around him. The Altarian had lived through many battles, but nothing like this. The Velthari ships looked like nightmares made real. Each vessel was a twisted mix of metal and living flesh, with long tentacles that moved like they were alive. Some ships were as big as moons covered in what looked like eyes that glowed with evil light. They had been sleeping for thousands of years at the edge of the galaxy, and now they were awake and very angry. "Sir, we count 2,000 enemy ships," reported Lieutenant Zixtal, his insect-like form clicking nervously at his station. "Our fleet has only 300 vessels." Kethvar nodded grimly. The Galactic Confederation had gathered ships from 12 different worlds. There were crystal beings from Zephyria, whose ships looked like floating diamonds. The gas-like Nethals flew in sphere-shaped vessels that seemed to float like bubbles. The tough Kricks brought their heavily armored ships that looked like flying beetles. Everyone had come to make this last stand. "All ships, this is Admiral Kethvar," he spoke into his communicator. "We know the odds. We know what happens if we fail. 3 star systems are already dead because of these monsters. Billions of lives lost. Today we fight not just for victory, but for the right of all life to exist in this galaxy." The bridge was quiet except for the humming of machines. Through the viewing ports, Kethvar could see the other ships in his fleet. They looked so small compared to what was coming for them. The Stellar Unity, his own ship, was one of the biggest in the Confederation Navy, but even it would look like a toy next to the largest Velthari vessels. "Sir," called out his communications officer, a floating jellyfish-like being named Flotmer. "We're getting reports from our scouts. The enemy will be in weapons range in 20 minutes. Kethvar walked to the front of the bridge and looked out at the stars. This system, called Nexus, was the heart of galactic trade. Millions of ships passed through here every day, carrying goods and people between thousands of worlds. If it fell, the Velthari would control the main routes through this part of the galaxy. "What do we know about their weapons?" he asked his science officer. "They use bioplasma cannons," replied Silvara, a tall, thin being with silver skin. "Our scouts saw them destroy the defense platforms at Rigel 7. The weapons seem to eat through our shields like they're not even there. And sir, their ships appear to heal themselves after taking damage. That was the worst part. The Confederation had the best technology they could build, but these ancient enemies had things that seemed like magic. Ships that could fix themselves, weapons that grew stronger the more they fired. And worst of all, they seemed to enjoy causing pain and death." "Sir," Flotmer's voice was excited. "Long-range sensors are picking up something. A single ship is approaching from the Sol system." Kethvar's translator made a sound like confusion. "The Sol system? You mean the humans?" "Yes, sir. One human vessel is heading this way at maximum speed." The Admiral almost laughed, but not in a happy way. The humans had only been in space for about 100 years. They were new to the galaxy, and most species thought of them as primitive. Their technology was basic compared to the great powers. What could one human ship do against an armada that had destroyed entire worlds? "Open a channel when they get close enough," he ordered. "We can use every ship we can get, even if it won't make much difference." Around the bridge, his crew continued their work. The Krix engineers checked the weapon systems one more time. The Zephyrian navigators plotted escape routes for any ships that might survive the battle. The Nethal sensor operators watched the approaching enemy fleet with their strange, cloud-like forms pressed against their stations. "Admiral," said his first officer, a 4-legged cantor named Veltic. "Should we try to contact the human ship and warn them away? One vessel against this force? It would be suicide." Kethvar thought about it. The humans were brave. He had to give them that. In the short time they had been part of the galactic community, they had shown themselves to be determined and stubborn. But bravery wouldn't stop bioplasma cannons. "No," he said finally. "If they want to fight beside us, they have earned that right. Every species should have the chance to defend what they believe in." The minutes passed slowly. On the main screen, the Velthari fleet grew larger and more frightening. The lead ships began to spread out, forming attack formations that the Admiral recognized from historical records. These were the same patterns they had used to destroy the Maker civilization 10,000 years ago. "All ships prepare for battle," Kethvar announced. "Charge weapons, raise shields, and ready all fighters. Today we show these ancient monsters that the galaxy has not forgotten how to fight." The response came back from all 300 ships, in a dozen different languages, but the meaning was the same. They were ready to fight and die if necessary. "Sir, the human ship is close enough for communication," Flotmer reported. "Put them through." The main screen changed to show the inside of what looked like a human starship bridge. The beings there looked much like the humans Kethvar had met. Before, they walked on 2 legs, had 2 arms, and skin that came in different shades. But something was different about these ones. They moved with a strange kind of calm, like hunters who had found their prey. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel Indomitable Will," said a female human with dark hair. "We received your distress call, Admiral Kethvar. We're here to help." "Captain Chen," Kethvar replied, trying to sound diplomatic. "We appreciate your courage in coming here, but you should know what you're facing. The Velthari have weapons and technology far beyond anything in our fleets. Your single ship will do what it was built to do." The human interrupted with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Admiral, with respect, we know exactly what we're facing. We've been preparing for this fight longer than you might think." Before Kethvar could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding all over his ship. "Sir," Zixtal called out in panic, "the Velthari are opening fire. All ships incoming bioplasma barrage." The space around them lit up with green and purple energy as thousands of alien weapons fired at once. The first attack had begun, and the fate of the galaxy would be decided in the next few hours. As the Confederation ships raised their shields and prepared to return fire, the single human vessel moved forward through the fleet, heading straight toward the enemy armada. Whatever the humans had planned, they were about to show the galaxy something it had never seen before. The human ship looked wrong. That was the first thing Admiral Kethvar noticed as the Indomitable Will moved past his fleet toward the enemy. Where Confederation ships were smooth and graceful, built with curves that made them beautiful to look, at the human vessel was all sharp angles and dark metal. It looked like someone had built it specifically to hurt things. "By the 7 suns," whispered his science officer Silvara. "Look at the energy readings from that ship." Kethvar looked at the sensor display and felt his blood grow cold. The human ship wasn't just powered. It was barely containing something massive inside. Energy signatures spiked and danced across his screens like a caged storm trying to break free. "Sir, the Velthari plasma barrage is hitting our front lines," reported Zixtal. "The crystal ships are taking heavy damage. Their shields are failing." On the main screen, Kethvar watched in horror as the beautiful Zephyrian vessels began to crack under the alien assault. The bioplasma weapons ate through their energy barriers like acid through paper. 2 of the diamond-like ships simply broke apart, their crews dying in the cold vacuum of space. But then something impossible happened. The same green and purple energy that was destroying his ships struck the human vessel. Kethvar expected to see it torn apart like all the others. Instead, the dark metal hull seemed to drink the energy. The ship's surface began to glow, not with damage but with absorbed power. "What in the name of the ancestors?" Kethvar breathed. Captain Chen's voice came over the communication channel, still calm and pleasant. "Admiral, you might want to tell your ships to move back a bit. We're about to return fire." "Return fire?" Kethvar asked. "Captain, your ship is smaller than most of our cruisers. What can you possibly—" He never finished the sentence. The Indomitable Will opened fire, and the universe seemed to scream. The first weapon was something Kethvar had never seen before. A stream of metal projectiles shot out from the human ship at speeds that made his sensors think they were malfunctioning. The projectiles weren't just fast, they were moving at nearly the speed of light. When they hit the first Velthari cruiser, the ancient ship simply disappeared in a flash of white light. "Kinetic impactors," Captain Chen explained casually, as if she was discussing the weather. "Nothing fancy, just big chunks of metal moving very, very fast." The second weapon made even less sense. Strange energy beams reached out from the human ship and touched 3 enemy vessels. For a moment nothing happened. Then the Velthari ships began to fall apart at the molecular level, their hulls turning to dust as the very atoms forgot how to stay together. Exotic matter warheads, the human captain continued. They convince matter that it doesn't want to be matter anymore. But the third weapon was the most frightening of all. The indomitable will fired something that looked like normal energy beams at a group of enemy ships. When the beams hit, they didn't just damage the vessels, they seemed to learn from them. The energy changed color and intensity, becoming exactly what was needed to hurt each different type of ship it touched. In less than 2 minutes, the human vessel had destroyed more Velthari ships than Kethvar's entire fleet had managed to damage. "Admiral," said Captain Chen, and now there was something like hungry excitement in her voice. "We're going to move in closer. Your ships should probably stay back. This is about to get messy." The indomitable will accelerated toward the enemy fleet, and Kethvar noticed something that made his spine tingle. The ship wasn't moving like other vessels he knew. It moved like a living predator, adjusting its course and speed in ways that seemed almost alive. "Sir," Flotmer called out, his jellyfish form pulsing with worry. "I'm picking up communications from the Velthari fleet. They sound frightened." Frightened? Kethvar couldn't believe it. The ancient enemy had destroyed civilizations without showing any emotion at all. "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir. They're calling the human ship the Dark Hunter and asking their command for instructions. Some of their vessels are actually trying to move away from it." On the screen, Kethvar watched the human ship tear through enemy formations like a knife, through cloth. Every weapon it used was different, as if the humans had studied every possible way to destroy their enemies and brought them all to the battle. Swarms of tiny missiles shot out from the ship, but these weren't normal weapons either. As Kethvar watched, the missiles seemed to talk to each other, changing their attack patterns and learning from what the enemy ships did to defend themselves. When the Velthari shot down some of the missiles, the remaining ones adapted, becoming harder to hit. "Captain Chen," Kethvar called out, "what kind of weapons are those?" "Smart missiles," she replied, and he could hear her smiling. "They watch, they learn, they get better. My grandmother always said the best way to win a fight is to be smarter than the other guy." Another group of Velthari ships tried to surround the human vessel. They fired their bioplasma weapons from all sides, creating a cage of deadly energy. But the indomitable will did something that made Kethvar's head hurt to watch. The ship seemed to step sideways through space itself, appearing behind the enemy ships without ever crossing the distance between them. "Spatial displacement, Captain," Chen explained before he could ask. "We studied the math on how space works. Turns out if you know what you're doing, you don't always have to go around things." The human weapons that followed this impossible movement were even stranger. Beams of twisted space reached out and grabbed enemy ships, folding them in half, like pieces of paper. Other weapons shot holes in reality itself, creating tiny black holes that sucked in everything around them before disappearing. "Sir," Silvara said in a shaky voice, "I don't understand any of these energy readings. Their technology doesn't match anything in our databases." Kethvar was beginning to understand something that made his blood feel like ice water. The humans weren't using advanced versions of known technology. They were using completely different ways of thinking about how the universe worked. "Captain Chen," he said carefully, "how long has humanity been developing these weapons?" There was a pause before she answered, and when she did, her voice was quieter. "Admiral, we've been preparing for this kind of fight since before we had spaceflight. Since before we had electricity. Since the first human picked up a rock and decided to use it against something that wanted to hurt his family." On the screen, another wave of Velthari ships fell to human weapons. Some were destroyed so completely that not even dust remained. Others were disabled so precisely that their crews were left alive but completely helpless. "We spent our whole history learning how to fight," Captain Chen continued. "Every war, every battle, every conflict taught us something new. When we finally reached the stars, we didn't stop learning. We just found bigger things to point our weapons at." The communication channel filled with the sound of alarms from the human ship, but Captain Chen's voice remained calm. "Admiral, we're picking up massive energy signatures from the enemy flagship. Looks like they're getting serious. This should be fun." Fun. The human called a battle against an ancient enemy that had destroyed star systems. Fun. Kethvar looked at his crew and saw his own thoughts reflected in their faces. They had called for help, and help had arrived. But now he wondered if they had invited something into their galaxy that might be just as dangerous as the enemy they were fighting. Theo. Difference was, this dangerous thing was on their side for now. Admiral Kethvar couldn't stop staring at the battle data flowing across his screens. In 30 minutes, the single human ship had destroyed over 200 Velthari vessels. Ships that had taken his entire fleet hours to damage were being torn apart like paper toys. "Sir," his communications officer Flotmer said, his jellyfish form glowing with confusion, "I'm receiving a data burst from the human ship. Captain Chen says she's sending us some historical files." "Historical files? In the middle of a battle?" "She says it will help us understand what we're seeing." Kethvar nodded, and the main screen split to show the ongoing fight on one side and the human data on the other. What he saw there made him question everything he thought he knew about the species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers. The files showed Earth's history, but not the peaceful version the humans usually shared. With other species, this was the real story. A planet where every piece of land had been fought over, where every generation had faced wars, plagues, disasters, and enemies that tried to wipe them out completely. "By the Seven Suns," whispered Silvara as she read through the data. "They fought each other for thousands of years. Look at this. They had a war that lasted 100 years, another that killed half their population, and they kept detailed records of every battle, every weapon, every tactic." But that wasn't the most shocking part. As Kethvar dug deeper into the files, he found references to something called the Origin Project, ancient records that suggested humans hadn't evolved naturally on Earth. They had been placed there, created by the same mysterious race that had built the Velthari. "Captain Chen," he called out over the communication link, "these files, they suggest that humanity is not native to Earth." "That's right, Admiral," came the calm reply, as another group of enemy ships exploded on the screen. "We figured that out about 50 years ago when we started digging deep enough. Turns out we're not the young species everyone thinks we are. We're the older siblings." The data files continued to reveal impossible truths. The beings who had created both humanity and the Velthari had been conducting an experiment. They made different species with different strengths. The Velthari were designed to conquer through superior technology and biological adaptation. They were meant to be the ultimate rulers. Humanity was designed for something else entirely. "They made us to be the ultimate warriors." Captain Chen's voice continued as her ship performed another impossible maneuver, appearing inside a Velthari formation and tearing it apart from within. "Every disaster that hit Earth, every challenge we faced was part of the design. We were being trained." "Trained for what?" Kethvar asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. "To fight things like the Velthari when they got out of control." The battle data on his screen showed something that made Kethvar's blood run cold. The indomitable will wasn't just winning, it was learning. Every time the Velthari tried a new tactic or weapon, the human ship adapted faster than should have been possible. "Sir," called out Zixtal from his station, "I'm analyzing the human ship's responses. It's like they already know what the enemy is going to do before they do it." "We studied them," Captain Chen explained, as if reading his thoughts. "For the last 50 years, since we found the origin files, we've been preparing for this exact fight. We know how the Velthari think, how they fight, what their weaknesses are. They were designed to be perfect conquerors, but perfect things are predictable." On the screen, Kethvar watched the human ship do something that hurt his brain to see. It fired a weapon that somehow attacked the enemy ships in the past. Velthari vessels that had been moving and fighting suddenly found that their weapons had never been loaded, their shields had never been raised, their engines had never been started. "Temporal warfare," Captain Chen said casually. "We figured out how to hurt our enemies before they decided to fight us. Took us a while to work out the math, but humans are good at math when lives are on the line." But it was the next weapon that truly terrified the Admiral. The indomitable will released something that looked like a cloud of silver dust. When it reached the enemy ships, the dust began to eat them. But this wasn't just destruction. It was conversion. The destroyed Velthari ships became more of the silver dust, which then attacked more ships. Self-replicating nanites, the human captain explained. They turn whatever they touch into more of themselves. Don't worry, they're programmed to stop after exactly 1 hour. We learned our lesson about runaway replication scenarios back in 2157. The casual way she mentioned nearly destroying their own world while testing weapons made Kethvar realize something terrifying. The humans weren't just good at fighting. They were so good at it that they had to be careful not to destroy themselves by accident. "Captain," he said slowly, "what you're showing us, these aren't the weapons of a species that just learned space travel. These are the tools of a civilization that has been preparing for galactic war for decades." "Longer than that, Admiral," came the reply. On the screen, the human ship was now surrounded by over 500 Velthari vessels, all firing at once. The amount of energy hitting the indomitable will should have vaporized any known ship. Instead, the human vessel was glowing brighter, absorbing all that power. "We've been preparing for this fight since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what else might be out there." The absorbed energy was released all at once in a weapon that Kethvar had no name for. It looked like a wave of pure destruction that swept out from the human ship in all directions. Every enemy vessel it touched simply stopped existing, not destroyed, not vaporized. They just stopped being there as if they had never existed at all. "Existence negation field," Captain Chen said, and now there was something like satisfaction in her voice. "We asked ourselves what would happen if we could convince the universe that certain things had never been made in the first place. Turns out the universe is very cooperative if you ask nicely." In the silence that followed, Kethvar looked around his bridge at his crew. Every face showed the same expression of shocked understanding. They hadn't called for help from a primitive species. They had awakened something that had been quietly preparing to defend the galaxy from threats that no one else could handle. "Captain Chen," he said finally, "how many more ships does Earth have?" There was a pause, and when she answered, her voice carried a note of dark amusement. "Admiral, the indomitable will isn't our most powerful warship. It's our training vessel. We use it to teach new captains how space combat works." The implications of that statement hit the bridge like a physical blow. If this unstoppable engine of destruction was their training ship, what were their real warships like? "Sir," Flotmer called out, his form flickering with fear. "Long range. Sensors are detecting the Velthari flagship approaching our position. It's massive, sir. Larger than anything in our databases." On the screen, the enemy command vessel appeared like a dark moon, covered in weapons and organic growths that pulsed with malevolent energy. It was easily 10 times larger than anything else in the battle, a biomechanical horror that radiated power. Captain Chen's voice came over the channel one more time, and now it carried something that made Kethvar's skin crawl. It was the sound of a predator that had finally found prey worthy of its attention. "Well now," she said softly, "that looks like it might actually be fun. Admiral, you might want to move your fleet back. We're about to show these ancient monsters what happens when you wake up the thing that was specifically made to kill you." The human ship turned toward the approaching flagship, and Kethvar could swear he heard it humming with anticipation. Commander Vel-Sharik had lived for 3,000 years, but never had he experienced the emotion now flooding through his massive form. Fear. Pure animal fear that made his biomechanical implants twitch and his organic parts secrete stress hormones. From the command center of the world render, his species' greatest achievement, he watched the impossible human ship tear through his fleet like it was made of fragile flowers. The vessel was smaller than most of his cruisers, yet it moved through space like a living nightmare, destroying everything it touched. "Command status report," he growled through his translator to the dozen Velthari officers around him. Each was a perfect fusion of flesh and machine, bred and modified for warfare over countless generations. They were supposed to be the ultimate warriors, the inheritors of galactic dominance. "Sir," replied Sub-Commander Krelvash, her multiple eyes blinking in sequence as data flowed through her neural implants. "We have lost 843 vessels in the last hour. The enemy ship appears to be using weapons technology that operates outside known physical laws." "Impossible," Velsharik said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Our creators gave us dominion over this galaxy. No species should possess technology superior to ours." But even as he said it, he watched another squadron of his finest dreadnoughts disappear in flashes of impossible light. The human ship wasn't just destroying them. It was playing with them, testing different weapons like a scientist conducting experiments. "Sir," called out his communications officer, "we're receiving distress calls from Attack Group 7. They report that the human ship has released creatures of some kind, boarding pods with living beings inside." "Living beings?" Velsharik's interest was piqued despite his fear. "Show me." The main screen changed to show footage from one of his damaged cruisers. Velsharik watched in growing horror as small craft attached themselves to his ship's hull and began cutting through the biometal armor like it was soft tissue. But it was what emerged from those craft that made his ancient blood run cold. Humans in powered armor. The suits they wore looked like mechanical predators, all sharp angles and glowing eyes. But it wasn't the armor that terrified him. It was how the humans moved. They flowed through his ship's corridors like liquid death, working, together with a coordination that seemed impossible for individual beings. "By the void," whispered Krelvash as they watched. "Look how fast they adapt." On the screen, the human boarding party encountered Velthari weapons for the first time. Within minutes, they had figured out how to use them. Not just use them, improve them. The ancient plasma rifles in human hands suddenly fired with twice their normal power and accuracy. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "the humans in Section C have taken control of our own defense systems. They're using our weapons against us." But worse than their technical skills was something else Velsharik could see in the way they fought. The humans seemed to be enjoying themselves. They moved through his ship with the casual confidence of apex predators who knew they were the most dangerous things in the room. "Evacuate that vessel," he ordered. "Seal all blast doors and vent the sections they've entered to space." "Sir, we've already tried that," Krelvash replied with growing panic in her voice. "The humans have adapted their equipment to work in vacuum. And, sir, they're still fighting. In hard vacuum with no air, they're still fighting and winning." Velsharik felt something he hadn't experienced since his species' first awakening. Millennia ago. The touch of racial memory, ancient warnings encoded in their genetic structure by their creators. Warnings about something called the Warbringers. "Access the deep archives," he ordered. "Search for any references to Warbringers or final weapon in our creators' records." As his crew worked, more reports flowed in. The human ship had deployed new horrors, swarms of mechanical insects that burrowed into his vessel's hulls and began converting them from the inside. Energy weapons that somehow reached through his ship's shields without breaking them. And worst of all, devices that seemed to make his crews forget how to operate their own equipment. "Sir," Krelvash said, her voice shaking, "the archive search has results. According to our creators' final records, they designed 2 ultimate weapons. We were the first, created to conquer and rule through superior technology and adaptation. And the second, a species designed to destroy anything that threatened the balance of the galaxy. They called them the final answer, beings who would evolve through conflict until nothing could stand against them." Velsharik stared at the screen showing the human ship. It was now surrounded by the remnants of his once mighty fleet, but instead of looking damaged, it appeared to have grown stronger. Its hull glowed with absorbed energy, and new weapon systems had emerged from hidden compartments. "The humans," he said quietly, "our creators made the humans to destroy us if we became a threat." "It appears so, sir," Krelvash confirmed. "According to these files, the Warbringers were placed on a world designed to forge them through constant conflict. Every disaster, every challenge was meant to make them stronger and more capable of warfare." On another screen, Vel'Shariq watched his boarding parties attempt to retake one of their own ships from human invaders. What he saw made him want to tear out his own eyes. The humans fought like demons, but worse than that, they fought smart. Every tactic his warriors used, the humans countered within minutes. They turned his own ship's systems against his crews, created traps from common equipment, and moved through the vessel like they had built it themselves. "Sir," his weapons officer reported, "Attack Group 3 is requesting permission to retreat. They say the human ship is doing something to their targeting systems. Their weapons are turning around and firing on their own vessels." Retreat? Vel'Shariq had never given such an order in his long life. His species didn't retreat. They conquered or died trying. But as he watched more of his ships fall to impossible human weapons, he realized that traditional thinking might not apply to the situation. "All ships fall back to the world render," he ordered. "We'll make our stand here with our greatest weapons." As his surviving vessels limped toward his flagship, Vel'Shariq activated the world render's most terrible systems. Bio-cannons that could crack planets, shield generators powered by captured stars, armor made from materials that existed in 17 dimensions at once. Surely this would be enough to stop one human ship. But even as he prepared his defenses, more information flowed in from the archives. The humans hadn't just been designed to be warriors, they had been given something else: the ability to show mercy to defeated enemies. They were meant to be the galaxy's ultimate protectors, not its destroyers. "Sir," called out his sensor operator, "the human vessel is approaching. But sir, it's not attacking our retreating ships, it's letting them escape." Vel'Shariq watched in confusion as his damaged vessels fled past the human ship without being fired upon. The indomitable will could have destroyed them all easily, but instead it focused on his flagship alone. Captain Chen's voice came over the communication channel, speaking perfect Velthari. "Commander Vel'Shariq, I believe we need to talk." "You speak our language," he said, too surprised to maintain his commanding tone. "We speak everyone's language," came the calm reply. "We've had a lot of time to prepare for this meeting. Your people have been asleep for a long time, but we've been watching and learning. What do you want, human?" There was a pause before she answered, and when she did, her voice carried something that sounded almost like sadness. "To finish the job we were created to do. But Commander, it doesn't have to end with the destruction of your species. Our creators gave us the ability to choose mercy over annihilation." As the world render's weapons charged and the human ship approached, Vel'Shariq realized that his ancient enemy was offering him something no Velthari commander had ever been offered in 3,000 years of conquest: a chance to surrender and live. The question was whether his pride would let him take it. The world render was a monument to Velthari supremacy, a biomechanical fortress the size of a small moon. Its surface crawled with weapon systems that had destroyed civilizations, and its core contained technologies that bent the laws of physics to the species' will. It was the ultimate expression of their creator's vision, a weapon that could reshape the galaxy. Against it flew a single human ship that looked like a dark splinter of metal and fury. Admiral Kethvar watched from the bridge of his flagship as the two vessels approached each other. Around him, his crew monitored every sensor reading, trying to understand what they were about to witness. "Sir," reported Silvara, "energy readings from the Velthari flagship are off our scales. They're powering up weapons that could destroy entire star systems. And the human ship? It's singing, sir." "Singing?" "The hull vibrations are creating a harmonic frequency. It sounds almost like a war song." On the main screen, Captain Chen's face appeared calm and focused. Behind her, the bridge of the indomitable will hummed with quiet activity as her crew prepared for what might be the most important battle in galactic history. "Admiral," she said, "you might want to record this. One way or another, this is going to be something the history books will want to remember." The world render fired first. The amount of energy that erupted from the ancient flagship made the previous battle look like a minor skirmish. Bioplasma cannons that could melt continents focused their fire on the tiny human vessel. Reality-warping weapons tried to erase it from existence. Gravitational beams attempted to tear it apart at the molecular level. The indomitable will flew through it all like it was a gentle rain. Impossible, breathed Commander Vel-Sharik from his command center. Nothing can withstand the full power of the world render. But Captain Chen's voice came back over the communication channel, still perfectly calm. Commander, your weapons are impressive, but they're based on principles we figured out 50 years ago. We've had time to develop countermeasures. What happened next made every being watching question their understanding of physics. The human ship didn't just survive the overwhelming assault, it began to dismantle it. Beams of some unknown energy reached out from the indomitable will and touched the world render's weapon systems. One by one, the great guns fell silent, not destroyed but simply convinced to stop working. Quantum intrusion systems, Captain Chen explained, as her ship moved closer to the massive enemy vessel. We're politely asking your weapons to consider whether they really want to keep fighting. But the world render had more than just energy weapons. Ancient biomechanical defenses activated, releasing swarms of living fighters that moved like schools of predatory fish. Each creature was the size of a small ship, bred for killing and enhanced with technology beyond most species' understanding. The human response was swift and precise. Instead of destroying the biofighters, the indomitable will released clouds of something that made them simply fall asleep. Thousands of deadly creatures drifted peacefully through space, their weapons powered down, their aggression replaced by artificial calm. Neural pacification field, the human captain said. We learned a lot about biological control systems from studying our own brains. Turns out most aggressive impulses can be temporarily turned off if you know which buttons to push. Commander Vel-Sharik stared at his displays in growing panic. Every weapon system, every defense, every terror that his species had perfected over millennia was being countered with casual ease. But worse than that, the humans weren't trying to destroy the world render. They were taking it apart piece by piece like a surgeon performing a delicate operation. Sir, reported Krelvash, they're not attacking our life support systems or crew quarters. They're targeting only weapons and engines. It's like they want to capture the ship intact. But why? Vel-Sharik asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Captain Chen's voice provided the confirmation. Because, Commander, you and your crew are living beings with the right to exist. Our job isn't to commit genocide. It's to stop the threat you represent while preserving as much life as possible. The final assault on the world render was a masterpiece of precision warfare. The indomitable will deployed weapons that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, reaching through the fortress ship's seemingly impenetrable armor to touch specific systems inside. One by one, the great ship's capabilities were stripped, away without harming its crew. Engines that had powered the vessel for thousands of years simply stopped working. Shield generators that could withstand the death of stars quietly shut down. Communication systems that coordinated fleets across the galaxy fell silent. When it was over, the world render hung in space like a defeated giant. All of its weapons, dark, all of its systems offline except for life support and basic operations. Commander Vel-Sharik, Captain Chen said, her voice carrying a note of respect that surprised everyone listening. I offer you the surrender of your forces and the guarantee that your people will be treated with dignity and care. For a long moment, there was silence. Then Vel-Sharik's voice came over the channel, heavy with 3,000 years of pride and the weight of absolute defeat. I accept your terms, Captain Chen. The Velthari fleet surrenders. Admiral Kethavar felt something like relief flood through him. But it was mixed with a new kind of concern. The humans had just demonstrated the ability to defeat the most powerful force the galaxy had ever seen, and they had done it with restraint and mercy. What did that make them? Captain Chen seemed to read his thoughts. Admiral, we know what you're thinking. You're wondering if you've traded one threat for another. The answer is no, we're not conquerors, we're guardians. We were made to protect the galaxy from things like the Velthari, not to rule it. But what happens now? Kethvar asked. Your people have capabilities that far exceed anything else in known space. Now we go home, she replied simply. We've done what we came to do. The Confederation can handle prisoner care and rehabilitation. We're not really built for peaceful administration. were much better at breaking things than fixing them. As the human ship began preparations to leave, medical vessels from the Confederation fleet moved toward the disabled Velthari ships to provide aid to the survivors. The ancient enemy that had terrorized the galaxy was now just another group of beings in need of help. Captain Chen, Admiral Kethvar, called out one final time, "Will we see more human ships in the future?" There was a pause, and when she answered, her voice carried a note of warning wrapped in a promise. "Admiral, Earth has many ships like the Indomitable Will. We patrol the galaxy's edge, watching for threats that might emerge from the dark. Most species will never see us, and that's how we prefer it. But if something else like the Velthari appears, then we'll be there," she said simply. "That's what we were made for." As the Indomitable Will prepared to jump to hyperspace, it transmitted one final message to the Confederation fleet: technical specifications for medical equipment that could help treat Velthari injuries, food synthesis patterns that could provide nutrition for the captured crews, even educational materials to help rehabilitate beings who had known only conquest for their entire lives. The last thing Admiral Kethavar saw was the human ship disappearing into hyperspace, leaving behind only the memory of impossible weapons and the promise that somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity stood watch over the galaxy. In the weeks that followed, word of the battle spread throughout known space. The Velthari were defeated. The galaxy was safe. And somewhere beyond the rim, the humans waited with patience that came from millions of years of practice and weapons that could reshape reality itself. Most species went back to their normal lives, grateful for the peace and trying not to think too hard about their protectors, but every government, every military commander, every being with any sense added a new entry to their diplomatic protocols. Under no circumstances should any action be taken that might anger the humans. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is wake up something that was specifically designed to be better at fighting than you are, especially when that something has spent its entire existence preparing for the day you finally showed up.